In the world of unsolved murders, there are those cases that keep every true crime fanatic up at night. One of them is the murder of Lindsay Buziak, a 24-year-old real estate agent stabbed to death in February 2008 while showing a house to her clients in the posh area of Victoria, British Columbia. It's been more than 15 years now, and even to this day, vital details of this case have continued to elude police and the best internet sleuths. Who were the couple that Lindsay showed their house to? Was Lindsay's murder a case of mistaken identity? And most importantly, who wanted Lindsay Buziak dead and why? Lindsay Elizabeth Buziak was born on November 2nd, 1983 to Jeff Buziak, a real estate agent, and Evelyn Reitmeyer, a stay-at-home mum. As her family would describe her, Lindsay was a happy little thing. Smart, full of joy, fashion-conscious even from a young age, and most importantly, super caring.
I think that was her main focus, was always caring for everyone. She started a Facebook page, and it was people who love Sarah as much as I do. And she started it for me and would have people join, and she would just go on about our friendship and our sisterhood.
Generally speaking, Lindsay had a great childhood. Growing up in Greater Victoria, Canada, Lindsay hardly wanted for anything. Her parents weren't rich, but they were comfortable, and they made sure that she had everything she needed, including love and affection. By the mid-90s, though, that affection had run out between Lindsay's parents, and the two separated. Her mother got custody of Lindsay and her sister, Sarah, and remained in Victoria. Jeff, on the other hand, moved to Calgary, Alberta, and continued his work as a real estate agent. Through all of this, Lindsay kept in contact with her father. And perhaps because of his influence, when it came time for her to choose a career, she chose real estate. As a first step, Lindsay enrolled in a real estate trading program at the UBC Sauder School of Business. But she wasn't very great at math, so she sought help from one Helen Jones. And it was in one of Jones's workshop that Lindsay met the man who would eventually become her boyfriend and a suspect in her murder, Jason Zalo. It was pretty much love at first sight for the two young kids as they hit it off instantly. They didn't start dating right away, however, this happened after Lindsay passed her real estate exam in June 2006, officially landing her license to practice as a realtor in Greater Victoria. As it turned out, Lindsay was your regular prodigy in the field of real estate. Barely a year after gaining her license, and Lindsay had already been listed as one of the top 20 real estate agents under the age of 25 to look out for in Victoria. Obviously, Lindsay wasn't just talented, she was also quite ambitious, and some would say that this was one of the things that drew her to Jason Zalo. The Zalos, Jason Zalo, his brother Ryan, and his mum Shirley, were top names in the real estate industry in Victoria. And Lindsay particularly looked up to Shirley Zalo, possibly because Shirley represented something Lindsay aspired to as an upcoming realtor. One of Lindsay's friends, in an interview with Capital Daily, even said that her friend seemed happy to be associated with Shirley Zalo, to be in her inner circle. So this probably explains why Lindsay switched firms barely a year after getting her first job and joined Remax Commotion, the same company where Shirley and her sons worked. Once again, Lindsay shone at her new job, grossing about $3.2 million with the sale of only 8 properties. Meanwhile, on the relationship front, things were going pretty good for the young woman as well, at least at that point. The Zalos had this one-bedroom condo in the Inner Harbour, and Lindsay soon moved into it with Jason. Shortly after that, however, Lindsay started to get a bit dissatisfied and told people around her as much. On December 15th, 2007, Lindsay went down to Calgary to see her father. According to Jeff, on that visit, Lindsay informed him that she was no longer happy in her relationship and was considering breaking up with Jason for a number of reasons. But one good Christmas holiday with the Zalos later, and Lindsay and Jason seemed back in sync. Life was fabulous now, or so Lindsay thought. Unknown to her, fate had a real cruel joke to play on her. On February 1st, 2008, Lindsay received a cold call from a supposed client. This client was a woman with a heavy accent that Lindsay would later identify as somewhat Spanish. Her name, however, remains unknown, as Lindsay didn't write it down after she mentioned it on the call. Whatever the case, this client wanted to buy a house. Actually, she and her husband wanted to buy a house, and they had some pretty specific requirements for their preferred home. The house had to have a separate living area for a housekeeper. It had to be about 10 to 15 minutes away from town. Plus, it had to be vacant so that the couple could move in immediately. As the woman explained, her husband had just been transferred to Victoria from Vancouver, and they needed a place to live as soon as possible. In fact, the couple was ready to start seeing houses as soon as the next day. And if all went well, they were ready to buy right away. For context, the couple had told Lindsay they wanted a brand new $1 million home. Naturally, the prospects got Lindsay excited. $1 million sale was going to mean big bucks for the 24-year-old, commission-wise, that is, and this couple seemed serious. So once the caller hung up, Lindsay immediately went to work looking for homes that she could show. Being a young realtor, Lindsay didn't have any seven-figure listing, but that wasn't exactly a big deal, as she could just sell another agent's property, split the commission with said agent, and still make good money. Nevertheless, the more the excitement grew about such a huge prospect so early in her career, the more Lindsay's doubts grew as well. Who were this couple, and why did they pick her of all people to be their agent? Also, how did they get her personal number? The caller had said that she had come highly recommended by one of her husband's friends, which was how she got Lindsay's phone number, but was this a sufficient explanation? Lindsay didn't think so. So she called all of her old clients to see if there was anyone who probably recommended her to this new client, but all the people she called were out of town at the time. Whatever the case, though, Lindsay tried to push the whole thing out of her mind and continued working on putting together a list of houses that met the couple's criteria. Over the course of several days, Lindsay put together a list of houses which she soon sent over to her new client. The client picked the first one on the list, 1702 D'Souza Place, and both agreed to have a showing the following day, Saturday, February 2nd at 5:30 p.m. Through all of this, though, Lindsay remained concerned, so she brought up the case of her odd client with her father and Jason, her boyfriend. According to Jason, Lindsay hadn't seemed particularly fearful when she brought up the subject, just inquisitive. Why would these guys choose a rookie like her to sell them $1 million home? That sort of thing. Meanwhile, Lindsay had one small dilemma with the date the woman had chosen for the showing of the house. That day was supposed to be her friend's bachelorette over in Vancouver. It was a surprise party, and Lindsay was one of the organizers. According to Capital Daily, Shirley Zalo, Jason's mum, claims that she offered to handle Lindsay's showing for her so she could go be with her friend in Vancouver for the bachelorette. Lindsay, however, wanted to be the one who showed the house. So she turned down their offers and decided she'd leave for Vancouver right after the showing. She never did. When the day of the showing finally arrived, it seemed Lindsay's concerns heightened some more. According to a receptionist who worked at the same company as Lindsay, she was freaked out and asked the office receptionist to try and ID her strange clients by, searching their name and phone number in the company database. Both receptionists came up with nothing, and that got the alarm bells in Lindsay's head ringing some more. Perhaps she shouldn't go for this showing alone, Lindsay thought. So over lunch, she asked her boyfriend, Jason, if he could accompany her to the showing. Once again, Jason would offer to handle the showing himself, but Lindsay would turn him down, insisting that she could handle the appointment herself. All she needed him to do was wait around for her in the neighborhood while she showed the house, and she'd be fine.
Jason's 6'3", 240 pounds, ex-semi-pro hockey player. An intimidating presence, if he wants to be.
After lunch, Lindsay would head home to change ahead of her showing, while Jason would head to an auto detailing shop, SHC Autograph-X, for a meeting. There, he'd meet up with a friend, Cohen Oatman, and the two of them would ride in Jason's Range Rover to the cul-de-sac where Lindsay was supposed to meet with her clients. The plan was for them to quickly do that, and then when the showing was over, Lindsay would head over to Vancouver for her friend's bachelorette, while the two men would go play some hockey. Their plans, however, were about to change very drastically. At around 5:20-something, Lindsay arrived at 1702 D'Souza Place, Gordon Head, the location of the house her clients wanted to see. She'd already texted Jason the address of the place earlier, and Jason, who left his meeting around 5:30 p.m., was already on his way there with his friend, Cohen. As Jason and his friend made their way to the place, they got lost. And it probably didn't help that the house Lindsay was showing was quite new because it didn't show up on GPS, which made locating the place even more difficult. So Jason called Lindsay asking for directions. However, just as Lindsay was about to do that, her clients arrived. And so she ended the call abruptly saying, "I gotta go, the Mexicans are here." According to eyewitnesses, the couple Lindsay met that day included a tall, dark-haired man wearing a long jacket and a woman with short blonde hair and a swirling black and red dress. Eyewitnesses also said that Lindsay and the couple shook hands and exchanged brief pleasantries before going inside. Once inside, Lindsay texted Jason with directions to the house, but Jason had already called his brother Ryan for directions and was on his way down. By the time Jason and Cohen arrived, it was around 5:40 p.m. Jason would later tell the police that his car headlights picked up on something, but that this figure, or the figures, turned away when they noticed his headlights.
If he had been 5 seconds later, he would have driven right into the suspects walking out here into the driveway.
Whatever the case, Jason assumed that the showing was probably in progress. So, in order not to appear like the nosy boyfriend, he drove past the house and waited for Lindsay in the driveway of a nearby house under construction. The house Lindsay was showing was still visible to him from where he was, but after a little while, Jason noticed that there didn't seem to be any sign of movement inside. So he texted Lindsay to find out if she was okay. Lindsay didn't respond. A few minutes later, Jason would move closer to the house and try to call Lindsay once again, but Lindsay wouldn't pick up the call. By the time it got to 6 p.m. and Jason still hadn't heard from Lindsay, he started to worry. So he and Cohen got out of the car and walked to the entrance of the house. The door, however, was locked, and when Jason tried ringing the doorbell, no one answered. Almost entering into full-on panic, Jason called the agent who originally had the house listed for the code to the garage door. But when Jason tried the code, the garage door wouldn't open. The door on the side of the house was locked as well, leaving Jason and Cohen with no way to enter the house. Not knowing what else to do, Jason called 911 at around 6:05 p.m. Meanwhile, his friend, Cohen, had found a set of French doors that led from the kitchen into the enclosed backyard, and they were open. All they had to do was hop over the fence and get in. So Jason gave Cohen a boost, and he jumped over the fence and into the house. Now, in the yard, Cohen made his way into the house through the French doors and immediately unlocked the front door from the inside so Jason could come in. Once inside, Jason and Cohen immediately split up and began to search for Lindsay in what appeared to be an empty house. Cohen took the ground floor while Jason ran upstairs. calling out for Lindsay.
He was already in front of me.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm running upstairs.
Okay.
And I was yelling, I'm like, Lindsay, Lindsay, Lindsay.
And where did Cohen go?
He went straight ahead.
He went straight ahead?
Yeah.
Okay. So just hang on a sec there.
As Jason took the stairs, he could see traces of blood on the steps. His mind already began to imagine the unthinkable, even though he probably hoped against it. That hope was soon dashed, though. Halfway through the stairs, before he could even get to the top, Jason would see the thing he desperately hoped not to see: Lindsay's lifeless body, slumped against the bedroom wall, lying in a pool of her own blood. Shortly after Jason discovered his girlfriend's lifeless body, the police arrived on the scene. Up to that point, Jason had tried resuscitating Lindsay with mouth-to-mouth, but Lindsay had been stabbed multiple times, so that wouldn't help. Naturally, when the police began their investigations, they started with Jason and Cohen. Both were very cooperative, with Jason willingly turning in his devices for investigation, submitting his fingerprints, and even agreeing to take part in a polygraph test, which he passed. All this, along with a solid alibi, helped to rule out Jason and Cohen as the murderers, even as the police tried to come up with a timeline of Lindsay's last minutes alive. Their discovery would turn out to be quite unnerving.
Police say it was just 9 to 11 minutes after entering the home. And how are they so sure?
At 5:41, there is a dial out on her phone. It goes to a friend she hasn't spoken to in some time, and all you can hear is muffling on the message.
It was a pocket dial with deadly implications.
When they went upstairs, there's a master bedroom and an ensuite bathroom. We know that when Lindsay turned to show the ensuite bathroom, she was then attacked from the rear. There was no defensive wounds whatsoever. We don't believe she had any pre-indication that something was amiss.
And as for that pocket dial,
so we believe that was actually at the point of attack. When the couple attacked Lindsay, somehow they've hit buttons on the BlackBerry and it sent out a phone call.
the last communication of any kind from Lindsay Buziak.
The manner in which Lindsay was killed easily suggested that this was a very personal matter. Lindsay was not sexually assaulted. Nothing was stolen from the premises. And nothing was stolen from Lindsay either. The entire arrangement seemed to be intentionally organized for one reason, and one reason only: to kill Lindsay. Immediately, this raises many questions like, who was this strange couple? How did they know Lindsay? Were these people Lindsay's killers, or was someone else involved? But even more confusing, what did Lindsay do to be the target of such a brutal murder? With Jason and Cohen, the first people at the scene of the crime, cleared as suspects, police had turned to other leads to crack this mysterious murder case. First, they tried to scour the crime scene for any forensic evidence. Unfortunately, this turned out to be a dead end, as there was little to be found. Even sniffer dogs couldn't pick up any scent, and there wasn't any bit of DNA evidence left at the scene. It was like the couple simply vanished without a trace. All the police could gather from their investigation was that Lindsay's killer, or killers, used only one weapon to carry out the murder. Whether the suspects wore gloves or not when they shook hands with Lindsay, though, remains unclear. Next, the police checked through Lindsay's phone to find the number of the client who had requested the showing. The client had a 778 phone number, which meant the service provider was Virgin Mobile. So the police requested subscriber information from the company. When the information got back, they learned that Lindsay's client had contacted her with a burner phone they bought in late 2007 from a Vancouver convenience store. The name attached to the phone was Paulo Rodriguez, but police later confirmed the name to be fake. But it gets even more mysterious here, because when police tried checking out surveillance footage showing the sale of the phone, they found out that the footage somehow no longer existed. On top of that, this phone was only ever used to contact Lindsay and then deactivated shortly after her murder. This seemed to suggest that the murderer used other phones to communicate with their co-conspirators in order to avoid being detected. So, a very high level of planning was involved. However, this was only just the beginning of the very weird things the police were going to uncover in their investigation. The story gets even more bizarre. In the course of carrying out their investigation, the police had requested Jason to turn in the Toshiba laptop that he and Lindsay shared. Studying the computer, police found that a lot of data had been deleted from its storage. Documents from the My Documents folder in the hard drive were gone. Chat messages were gone as well. But even more strangely, between January 24th and February 3rd, 2008, police found out that none of Lindsay's 700 friends sent her any messages on her Facebook wall. This was strange, considering how active Lindsay was on the social media app. As it turns out, though, this particular mystery was quite easily solved. Someone with access to Lindsay's Facebook login details had deleted all of her messages. The only question was, who did? Because when investigators asked Lindsay's family and friends about it, no one seemed to know anything. The only thing everyone was certain of was the sheer elaborateness of the scheme, and the extraordinary steps taken to cover their tracks revealed that Lindsay's murder was cold, calculated, and very personal in nature. This leads us to the two prevailing theories surrounding Lindsay's murder. It didn't take long for Lindsay Buziak's murder to make national and international news. As the story spread, everyone tried to figure out who could have murdered this young woman so cruelly. Dateline did an episode about it, and Dr. Phil even had Lindsay's father, Jeff, come onto his show to discuss the investigation. The big question on everyone's mind was, who killed Lindsay? And there are two top theories, which, as it turns out, are both interconnected. The first theory says that the Zalos were responsible for Lindsay's murder. And perhaps no one believed and championed that theory more than Jeff Buziak, Lindsay's dad. According to Mr. Buziak, during her trip to see him in Calgary in December 2007, Lindsay had mentioned that she wanted to break up with Jason for being overbearing.
She just felt Jason was overbearing and demanding and, jealous, possessive.
So are you saying that things were rocky enough that maybe Lindsay was going to break up with Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, she came out to Calgary to speak to me about that.
But that wasn't all. Jeff also claims that Lindsay mentioned something even more disturbing. Something about seeing something she shouldn't have seen. What this thing was, Lindsay didn't say specifically, but Jeff believed that it had something to do with the Zalos and Lindsay's eventual murder. While Lindsay and Jason were still dating, the two had moved in together into a condo owned by Shirley, like I said before. Jeff claimed that Shirley deliberately bought that property for Jason and Lindsay in order to isolate Lindsay from her family, suggesting that the Zalos had evil intentions from the start. Also, in his interview with Dateline, when they ran the episode on Lindsay's murder, Jeff mentioned that Jason didn't show any outward signs of grief after Lindsay's death.
I've never seen a tear drop out of his eye. I've never seen a sniffle from his nose. What the hell's with that?
And it wasn't just Jeff. Lindsay's friends corroborated this too.
I couldn't keep myself together, and I didn't see any tears.
All of this evidence and more, therefore, led Jeff to the suspicion that the Zalos were very likely involved in his daughter's death. Unfortunately, investigations into Jeff himself will show that he might not be the most credible source in this case. Not only has the police declared the Zalos unconnected to the murder, but Jeff Buziak has also developed quite a reputation for sometimes fabricating claims to make his case. Twice he planted false evidence, one being a letter he claimed Lindsay wrote to him. According to the Capital Daily, Jeff claimed that his daughter wrote him a letter where she mentioned that she saw something she shouldn't have seen. The letter, however, was very likely fake, as investigations carried out by Capital Daily uncovered an email sent in 2013 by Jeff to one of his website's administrators. In it, Jeff had written, "That faux letter is certainly bothering some, isn't it?" Another was a false confession to Lindsay's murder posted on his website in 2017 and alluding to someone named Ross Adicott as Lindsay's killer. But once again, as it turns out, Adicott had nothing to do with the confession, and when police turned to Jeff to share the IP address of the person who posted the confession, so they could track them down, Jeff refused to respond, even though he had access to it by virtue of owning the blog. For someone who has made such a fuss about finding his daughter's killer, this seems like a very odd thing to keep from the police. But it gets worse. Some who have worked with Jeff in his effort to find his daughter's killer have come back with stories to tell. One, speaking confidentially to Capital Daily, claimed that they saw a lot of red flags working for Jeff Buziak, and that quitting the volunteer work they did for him was one of the best decisions they ever made. Naturally, all of these revelations put a significant dent on Jeff's credibility. However, as you're about to find out, the official story of what transpired on the day Lindsay was murdered, while not technically a lie, is such a skeletal form of the truth, the original story may as well have been describing a totally different event. Deeper investigations since February 2008, when Lindsay was killed, have uncovered more and more suspicious activities and events surrounding this case. And while they haven't led the police closer to a solution, they are definitely worth considering for the armchair investigator like yours truly. To begin with, according to Jason's own confession, it seems Jason's plan on that day was not to wait for Lindsay outside the house like they had both initially agreed, but to drop off some papers.
Jason Zalo. He told police the couple had lunch together at this restaurant. Then they split up. Lindsay over to the house she was going to show those eager buyers. Jason to take a contract to this auto detailing shop before meeting Lindsay at the house to drop off some papers.
If this was true and he was only coming to drop papers, then it raises a few problems. Wasn't he supposed to be there to help his girlfriend feel safe with these mysterious clients he knew she was worried about? Secondly, if he was only there to drop papers, then what did he mean by not wanting to be seen as a nosy boyfriend? It just seems out of place, Besides, evidence shows that Jason was always quite involved in Lindsay's real estate deals as her mortgage broker. In fact, he had encouraged Lindsay to take on the clients who are now suspected to be her killers because of the high commission she stood to make. And the only reason Lindsay agreed was because Jason had given his word that he would hang around to guarantee her protection. In light of all this, it seems odd that he would leave the vicinity of the house for such a trivial reason as not wanting to play the nosy boyfriend. It's even more odd that he would come 10 to 15 minutes later than agreed. Jason claimed that he needed to pick up a signed contract from a client at the SHC auto shop, but he spent about an hour there and only started to leave at 5:30 p.m., even though he knew his girlfriend was worried for her safety. Not only that, in the middle of Lindsay's conversations with the female client, before the day of the showing, the woman had informed her that her husband would no longer be coming with her for the showing. Perhaps the woman had picked up on Lindsay's fears, or, perhaps a co-conspirator had told the woman about it. Whatever the case, the final arrangement was that the woman was going to show up at the property alone. But then, on D-Day, the man suddenly showed, and Jason knew this because Lindsay let him know over the phone that the woman and her husband showed up. If Jason was truly worried for his girlfriend's safety, it brings us back to the question of why he would move his vehicle from the front of the house simply because he didn't want to appear nosy. But there's something else as well. When asked about his relationship with Lindsay on Dateline, Jason had claimed that everything was rosy between them, but Lindsay's friends begged to differ. According to them, Lindsay had been thinking of breaking up with Jason and going back to her old boyfriend, Matt McDuff. But Matt had recently gotten engaged to another woman, which left Lindsay heartbroken. It wasn't until after the vacation at Whistler that Lindsay finally stopped talking about breaking up with Jason and decided to give the two of them another try. Once again, this is completely different from the picture that Shirley Zalo, Jason's mother, painted of the relationship. Shirley had claimed on Dateline that the night before Lindsay got murdered, the two of them had gone on a walk and that Lindsay had told her that she was scared of her ex-boyfriend, Matt. This contradicts what Lindsay's close friends knew about their friend and appears to be an attempt on Shirley's part to cover up for her son, perhaps.
Shirley Zalo is the only person we spoke with in our reporting who told us Lindsay was afraid of Matt around the time of the murder. Of course, she is the mother of the man who was at one time the prime suspect. And by the way, police tell us that when Lindsay was killed, Matt and Lindsay had been apart for nearly 2 years. Each had moved on to new relationships. And according to police, they'd had no contact for months before the murder.
Of course, each of these events could understandably be considered coincidental when looked at in isolation. However, when taken together, they seem to suggest a pattern of events deliberately orchestrated by someone who was in on Lindsay's murder. In much simpler terms, they seem to suggest that Jason is, at the very least, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. The question now is, why? Why would Jason involve himself in the dastardly plan to commit such a heinous crime like the murder of his own girlfriend? According to Jeff, Lindsay had described Jason as overbearing and overpossessive. Did Jason somehow find out that Lindsay was considering breaking up with him? Did that make him mad enough to put out a hit on her? While that isn't entirely off the table, a more plausible answer may lie in our second theory, the drug bust theory. To uncover the drug bust theory, we have to go back a couple of months before Lindsay's death. In November 2007, the Calgary police got a call from someone informing them about a major drug shipment headed from Victoria to Calgary. This call triggered Operation High Noon, a sting operation that led to the arrest of high-ranking men in the Del Alcazar drug cartel, including Erickson Del Alcazar and Graham Scott Taylor. The arrests happened on January 22, 2008, 10 days before Lindsay was murdered, and some have drawn a connection between that operation and Lindsay's murder. A prevailing theory is that Lindsay was taken to the informant by the cartel, leading to a hit being placed on her. But why would the cartel suspect Lindsay? According to the police, Lindsay did not do or sell drugs. So what could have made the cartel so confident that it was Lindsay? Well, a probable reason Lindsay may have been suspected by the cartel is that it would appear that word somehow got out that the informant was a woman who worked in the Remax office, the same company Lindsay worked at with her boyfriend and his mum, up until the time of her death. It's not clear how the cartel got to know that the informant was a woman who worked in the Remax office, though. Some say that a corrupt cop on the inside may have informed them. Whatever the case, another important piece of this jigsaw puzzle is that though there's no evidence that Lindsay was involved in drug dealing, police have said she was friends with people who were drug dealers, lending more credibility to the possibility of Lindsay being the informant. In fact, while on her trip to Calgary a couple of months before she died, something happened.
While visiting Calgary, Lindsay made contact with at least 2 men, old friends she grew up with. And just a month later, one of those men was arrested in what police called the largest cocaine bust in Alberta history.
Operation High Noon turned out to be the biggest drug bust in the history of Alberta. About 80 kilos of coke were seized, along with $500,000 in cash. This brought the total financial loss suffered by the Del Alcazar cartel to about $8 million. A big enough motivation to get any cartel mad and murderous. And mad and murderous they were. Police say that on the night of January 22nd, 2008, after the first round of arrests was made, the cartel broke into people's houses and started to wake women up, demanding to know who they had spoken to.
A witch hunt occurred where people were being questioned. People were being pulled out of their beds in the middle of the night and asked, "Who have you spoken to?" Because they know that someone spoke to the police.
A couple of weeks after that, Lindsay was murdered. So it would seem like sometime after the drug bust, information about the alleged informant somehow got to the ears of the Del Alcazar cartel. Lindsay was female, worked at Remax, and she had just been in Calgary a few weeks earlier. Putting two and two together, the cartel probably came to the conclusion that it was indeed Lindsay who ratted them out. And so, as the theory goes, Cirilo Bautista Lopez, Erickson Del Alcazar's uncle and probably the financier of that particular shipment that went down, put out the hit on Lindsay. The question now is, was Lindsay actually the informant, or was she just set up by someone who wanted her dead? Well, one thing is very clear. The police have said categorically that Lindsay was not the informant. Besides, if word going around is to be believed, the informant is still very much alive and has, in fact, been granted permanent protection by the Saanich Police Department. Who then is this mystery informant, and what axe did they have to grind with Lindsay? Well, a review of the events that surround the Calgary drug bust and the murder of Lindsay could help provide a clue. First, we know that the Calgary drug bust led to the fall of the Del Alcazar drug cartel. In fact, to make up for the loss, the Del Alcazars had to sell off all of their assets. Meanwhile, another cartel started to thrive and prosper around that same time. Coincidence? Many said not. Now, this other cartel was run by one Zachary Ziggy Matheson. After Lindsay's murder, sources say that the Del Alcazars were on the warpath. Perhaps they realized that they had made a wrong hit because of the false information fed to them. Whatever the case, it's also been alleged that Ziggy Matheson did everything in his power to protect the Zalos from the Del Alcazars. The question, however, is why? Shirley Zalo already made it clear that her family had no connection with Ziggy. So why was Ziggy protecting her and her son? Well, it turns out that contrary to what Shirley Zalo claims, Ziggy and the Zalos actually go way back. As it turns out, Ziggy has been a long-term tenant of the Zalos and remained a tenant even after he was charged with drug trafficking in 2013. This shows some level of loyalty between the two, considering how much flack Shirley Zalo would have caught for not evicting a known drug dealer. Secondly, during the Whistler Christmas family vacation that Lindsay took with the Zalos in 2007, Ziggy was present on the trip with them. 3. It's clear that Ryan, Shirley's other son, and Ziggy are close friends. And not only that, Shirley and Deborah Matheson, Ziggy's mum, also happen to be friends as well, suggesting that the Mathesons and the Zalos were family friends, contrary to Shirley Zalo's claims. But there's something else. Something even more unnerving. According to sources, while Jason was trying to get into the house in a bid to look for Lindsay, he apparently called his mum to let her know he was having difficulty accessing the house. Now, what Shirley did next turned out to be very weird. Rather than just try to reach out to someone else who might have the passcodes to the garage door or something like that, Shirley raced down to the house. Problem is, she didn't know anything was wrong at that time, so why was her first instinct to panic? Was it just a sixth sense, a maternal instinct? Or, did she in fact know something was going down and knew Jason wasn't supposed to be there? With all this evidence, not to mention Shirley's false claims about not having anything to do with Ziggy Matheson, a plausible theory that some have come up with is that Shirley was the informant. Not only does she match the description of the informant leaked to the Del Alcazar cartel, but if she was an associate of Ziggy, and it appears she was, she had every motive to want to bring down the Del Alcazars. Perhaps the Zalos were involved with Ziggy Matheson in the drug trafficking, mortgage fraud, and money laundering underworld, and as we all know, in such environments, violent double-crossing is not an uncommon sight. It's entirely possible that the Matheson cartel wanted to bring down the Del Alcazar cartel, so they made a plan to sabotage the Del Alcazar's drug shipment, nominating Shirley to be the informant. Shirley is a respected member of the community, being one of the top realtors and manager of Remax. Besides, Ziggy Matheson lived in one of her houses, so her information would have been taken seriously. As for her reason for scapegoating Lindsay, if Shirley was in fact the informant, then she would have had to have covered her tracks to prevent being found out by the Del Alcazars. So it makes sense that she would try to feed false information to the Del Alcazars to get them to believe that it was Lindsay who ratted on them. Another question might be, however, why Shirley would choose Lindsay, her son's girlfriend of all people. Well, it could be that she found Lindsay most expendable. Consider that Lindsay had been wanting to break up with her son. And if Lindsay really did see something that she shouldn't have seen, as her father claims she told him, Shirley probably felt that if Lindsay went ahead with the breakup, she could blab about what she saw and put her and her son in trouble. So to make sure there were no loose ends, she felt like it might be best to permanently silence Lindsay altogether. Of course, all of this is pure speculation. The police have, after all, declared the Zalos to not be persons of interest in Lindsay's murder. And without concrete proof, neither Shirley Zalo nor her son Jason can be accused of murder or conspiracy to commit murder. Besides, there are more questions that still need to be answered. Apparently, on the day of the showing, Lindsay's clients had walked to the house on foot, which makes you wonder why Lindsay went ahead with the showing. If the clients indeed were looking to buy a house in the $1 million range, shouldn't they have driven to the appointment in a lavish car? To not drive at all and to walk to the showing instead should have set off alarm bells in Lindsay's head, not to mention that the husband, quote-unquote, unexpectedly showed up after the woman had told her over the phone that he wouldn't be showing up anymore. So why did she continue with the showing? Or did she actually continue with the showing at all in the first place? Secondly, according to the police, while on her trip to Calgary, Lindsay tried to visit the Facebook page of a relative of someone in the Del Alcazar camp. She also tried to reach the person by phone.
We don't know the nature of the call. We don't know why she called him. We don't know why she was on his Facebook site.
What they do know is that the person she contacted was the relative of a man named Erickson Del Alcazar, and that shortly after Lindsay went back to Victoria, Del Alcazar, along with 13 other people, were all caught in the biggest drug bust in the history of the province.
With all the circumstantial evidence we've seen, it would seem as if Jason and Shirley were indeed co-conspirators to Lindsay's mother. But how come Jason passed his polygraph test? Was he just a pathological liar? Or was he actually not involved in his girlfriend's death? And as neat as the Zalo/drug bust theory might seem, it does seem a little weird that the police have still not solved this case or made any arrests, especially with the tons of leads and interviews carried out. Is this a case of corruption within the Saanich Police Department? Is someone powerful preventing the truth from being revealed? Or are armchair detectives getting it all wrong? It wouldn't be the first time. It does seem odd that the crime phone used to communicate with Lindsay by the mysterious clients was bought 3 months before Lindsay's murder. That shows 3 months of planning, at least. But the drug bust happened only about 10 days before Lindsay was killed. So, how do we resolve that? All of these questions, and many others, not to mention the conflicting stories that have shrouded Lindsay's murder interviews, began in 2008, have continued to make this case elusive to both police and internet sleuths. Perhaps all of this is the careful work of an entity that has deliberately orchestrated a confusing atmosphere around Lindsay's death to make sure their identity is never uncovered. Or perhaps there's something even more sinister at play here. Whatever the case, the question of whether the mystery murder of Lindsay Buziak will ever be solved seems to be one that only Father Time can answer.